December 17, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. A bitter wind tears through the snow-cloaked pines as dawn bleeds into grey. The ground trembles beneath the distant thunder of engines, German Panthers and Tigers rolling through the fog like metal beasts awakened. American infantrymen, half-frozen and exhausted, brace behind wrecked trucks and shell-scarred walls. They've heard the rumors. The Sherman tank can't stand against German armor. It burns too easily. Its gun is too small, its armor too thin. To the Wehrmacht, it's a joke, a coffin waiting for its crew. But that morning, something different moves through the mist. A column of tanks, their hulls blackened by soot and their guns longer, meaner, steadier than before. The Americans call it the Easy Eight, the M4A3E8, the latest evolution of the Sherman. Inside, the crews are tense but confident. They know this machine is no joke. It's faster, more stable, more lethal. And it's about to announce its presence to the world in fire and steel. A low radio hum fills the air. Target, Panther, 2 o'clock. The Easy Eight's turret pivots with precision, the 76mm gun locking onto the silhouette moving through the snow. A flash, a thunderclap. The shell cuts through the morning haze, slamming into the Panther's side armor. A bloom of orange erupts, followed by black smoke curling upward like a dark flag. The German commander stares, disbelieving. Moments ago, he'd mocked the Sherman's thin skin. Now his prized tank is burning. For months, German soldiers had laughed at the sight of Shermans advancing into battle. They called them Tommy Cookers and Ronsons after the lighter that always lit. The Sherman was everywhere, reliable, yes, but predictable, outdated, weak against the brutal precision of German engineering. Until now, the Easy Eight was the response born from blood and frustration, shaped by the lessons of North Africa, Normandy, and the hedgerows of France. It carried the scars of every Sherman lost, redesigned to strike back harder. Winter in the Ardennes was unforgiving. Visibility fell to yards at times, snow swallowing entire roads. Tanks froze in place, engines sputtering in the cold. Yet the Easy Eight, powered by its robust Ford GAA V8 engine, pushed forward relentlessly. Its wide tracks bit into the ice where heavier Tigers slipped. Its new horizontal volute suspension absorbed the punishment of rough ground, keeping its gun steady even on the move. And its 76mm M1A1C gun, longer, faster, sharper, finally gave American crews the chance to punch through German armor at range. Each battle told the same story. German confidence turning to disbelief. Panthers hit before they could turn their turrets. Tigers ambushed from angles they hadn't anticipated. The Easy Eight was rewriting the rules. American crews who'd once whispered about hopeless odds now felt the tide shift beneath their tracks. For the first time, they could meet the enemy head-on and survive. At Bastogne, columns of German armor attempted to encircle the 101st Airborne. Snow fell like ash as the sky growled with distant artillery. Sherman crews crouched inside their tanks, breath freezing on the steel around them. Then came the order, advance. The Easy Eight surged forward, engines roaring, treads carving deep scars through the white landscape. Their commanders stood half-exposed in open hatches, guiding fire with calm precision. Each flash from the muzzle was a declaration. The days of running were over. Behind every machine was a story of relentless adaptation. In Detroit, engineers had torn apart the old Sherman blueprints, determined to save the lives of men they'd never meet. They replaced the outdated suspension with a smoother system for faster aim and movement. They extended the gun barrel by almost 2 feet, giving shells more velocity and penetration. They reworked armor plating around the hull and turret face. Every bolt, every weld carried the urgency of a war racing against time. In less than 6 months, production lines transformed. By late 1944, the first Easy Eights rolled off the assembly line, ready for Europe's frozen front. German tank crews had been trained to expect easy victories. Their optics were superior, their armor thicker, their guns longer. But they hadn't counted on American adaptability. When they first faced the Easy Eight, they mistook it for an ordinary Sherman. They would soon learn the difference the hard way. Within seconds of engagement, their confidence cracked as their shots glanced off sloped armor, and return fire pierced their hulls cleanly. The battlefield, once dominated by German steel, began to tilt. The Ardennes echoed with the clash of tank against tank. Fireballs rose in the distance as oil drums and ammunition cooked off. Wounded trees rained splinters. Men shouted through static-filled radios, their words lost to the chaos. Somewhere in that maelstrom, an Easy 8 crew sat in eerie silence between reloads, their commander whispering, "We got him." They didn't cheer. They just stared at the burning wreck of what once terrified them. It wasn't victory. It was vindication. As the hours dragged on, reports filtered through command posts, German armor losses mounting, Sherman survivability increasing. The balance of power had shifted, not through sheer numbers but through evolution. American industry had learned to listen to its soldiers. Every improvement was written in blood. Now that debt was being repaid. When night fell, the snow turned red in places. The forest glowed faintly from smoldering wrecks. Mechanics worked by lantern light, their breath misting as they patched bullet-riddled tanks with whatever steel they could find. Inside the hulls, crews sat in silence, hands trembling, faces blackened by soot. They were no longer afraid of the enemy's tanks, but they understood what their machines had cost to build and to use. The next morning, German reconnaissance pilots spotted something unexpected from the air. American armor formations advancing with frightening coordination. The Easy 8s weren't just fighting. They were moving faster, hitting harder, recovering quicker. It looked to German analysts like a new doctrine of armored warfare, agility and precision replacing brute strength. But it wasn't doctrine. It was desperation forged into innovation. By the end of that week, whispers spread through German lines. The new Shermans aren't the same. Tank commanders hesitated before advancing. The once mocked enemy had become unpredictable. And unpredictability on the battlefield was deadly. Still, for every Easy 8 that triumphed, another was lost to the overwhelming fury of German counterfire. The tank wasn't invincible. It was never meant to be. It was designed to survive long enough to win the fight, to keep moving while others burned. The crews knew it. They accepted it. They climbed back in again and again, because now they believed their steel could stand against the best Germany had built. In the snow-choked ruins of a Belgian village, a captured German officer looked at a wrecked Panther and muttered under his breath, "They've learned too quickly." The Easy 8 had done more than destroy tanks. It had shattered the illusion of German invincibility. The war's outcome was still uncertain, but the psychological tide had turned. What began as a machine of mockery was becoming a symbol of resilience and reinvention. The Americans had rewritten the battlefield equation, and deep inside the forests of Ardennes, the world's most feared tank crews were realizing that something far more dangerous than armor was now rolling toward them, an enemy that could adapt faster than they could destroy. And what came next would show just how deadly that evolution could become. The secret of the Easy 8 was born not in battlefields, but in blueprints and factories. In Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago, men and women who had never seen combat forged America's steel backbone. They worked 12-hour shifts under roaring machines, assembling the parts that would redefine the Sherman tank. Engineers examined field reports from Normandy and Italy, complaints about slow turret traverse, weak guns, and fragile suspensions. Every problem became a puzzle to solve, and by mid-1944, the answer took form: a re-engineered Sherman with a smoother ride, sharper aim, and teeth capable of biting through German armor. The E8 designation came from its new horizontal volute spring suspension, a quiet revolution in mobility. Earlier, Shermans bounced violently over rough terrain, forcing gunners to stop before firing. But with the HVSS system, the Easy 8 glided with stability. Crews could now fire accurately while on the move, an ability the Germans had dismissed as impossible. Its Ford GAA V8 engine, with over 500 horsepower, roared to life with a distinctive growl, a sound that soon filled Europe's valleys and forests. The tank weighed around 33 tons, but its improved powertrain let it maneuver with deceptive speed. In the chaos of war, mobility was survival, and the Easy 8 could dance where tigers stumbled. Then there was the gun, the heart of the transformation, the new 76mm M1A1C cannon, its barrel stretching nearly 11 feet, fired shells at velocities exceeding 2,600 feet per second. Against the frontal armor of a Panther, it was still a challenge, but flank shots could now penetrate with deadly precision. Special ammunition like the HVSS, high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, gave the Easy 8 the bite it desperately needed. American gunners, once helpless against thick German plating, now spoke of duels they could win. The Germans, accustomed to technological superiority, began noticing something unsettling in their after-action reports. Panther and Tiger crews described engagements where Shermans fired faster, struck accurately at range, and seemed to absorb hits without catastrophic fires. The new Shermans were also harder to spot, camouflaged better, moving quieter, and arriving in larger, coordinated formations. For the first time since 1940, German tank commanders felt hunted. That feeling came to life in the battle for Cologne, March 6, 1945. The city, once a proud symbol of German might, was now reduced to rubble and ash. Streets were choked with debris, tram lines twisted like metal vines, and the air hung thick with dust. The U.S. 3rd Armored Division was advancing cautiously, street by street. Snipers and Panzerfaust teams lurked in every shadow. But the real threat loomed near the cathedral, an ambush by a German Panther, its gun aimed down the main boulevard. An American Easy 8, commanded by Sergeant Bob Early, crept forward through the ruins. Every inch of the street felt like a trap. The Panther was waiting, invisible among shattered buildings. A German spotter gave the signal. The Panther fired first. The shell ripped through the air, missing the Sherman by inches, exploding against a nearby wall. Dust engulfed the tank, but the crew stayed calm. Early barked an order. "Traverse left, fire!" The Easy 8's 76mm roared, striking the Panther's turret. Sparks flew, no penetration. The two tanks circled each other in a deadly duel. Civilians hiding in cellars felt the ground quake with every shot. Smoke poured through the windows of burned-out apartments. The Panther fired again, grazing the Sherman's hull. The Easy 8 reversed, engine screaming, its gunner adjusting elevation by instinct. One more shot. The round sliced through the Panther's lower glacis, igniting its ammunition. A fiery blast tore through the street, scattering debris. The duel was over. Footage of that battle would later circulate among Allied troops, proof that the new Shermans could face Germany's best and win. But beneath the victory lay something deeper, the culmination of years of industrial learning, adaptation, and sacrifice. The Easy 8 was not a miracle weapon. It was the product of ordinary people refusing to accept defeat. Back in the factories, technicians studied wrecked tanks returned from Europe. They dissected every failure, the angle of a penetrated plate, the fracture of a gear, the weakness of a weld. Engineers like E.J. Rapson and M.W. McFarland reworked the hull design to increase sloping, making hits glance off rather than pierce. Turret castings were thickened. Fuel lines were repositioned to reduce fire risk. Each modification saved lives, and each life saved became the measure of success. On the battlefield, crews developed new tactics to exploit their machine strengths. Instead of standing toe-to-toe with Panthers, they struck from ambush using mobility and coordination. Easy 8s often worked in pairs, one drawing fire, the other flanking for the kill. Radio coordination was their hidden edge. American tank units, equipped with reliable FM sets, communicated seamlessly between platoons and air support. While German units often relied on hand signals or preset codes, the Americans moved like a single organism. Speed, precision, and communication fused into lethality. The psychological shift was palpable. German crews, once arrogant, now hesitated before engaging. Reports described unexpected American confidence, even aggression. Tanks that had once retreated now advanced boldly through smoke and shell fire. The Easy 8 gave its crews not just armor, but belief. In one clash near the town of Remagen, an American column raced to secure the Ludendorff Bridge before German engineers could destroy it. Easy 8s led the charge, absorbing artillery and machine gun fire as infantry followed close behind. One Sherman was hit and caught fire, but its crew bailed out and immediately manned another tank left idle in a ditch. They pushed forward without pause. By nightfall, the bridge was in Allied hands, an event that accelerated Germany's collapse. That victory wasn't only tactical, it was symbolic. The Easy 8 had become a spearhead of persistence. Even German intelligence analysts were forced to acknowledge the shift. Reports to high command noted the new American tanks as faster, more reliable, and massed in overwhelming numbers. The old mockery, the image of the Sherman as a weak, flammable target, was gone. In its place stood a new fear, the realization that the Allies could innovate faster than the Reich could recover. Still, the Easy 8's crews paid dearly. Every breakthrough came at a cost. Crews lived inside steel coffins for days, enduring claustrophobia, heat, and constant dread. The gunpowder smell clung to their uniforms. The vibration of the engine haunted their sleep. Yet they kept fighting, sustained by the knowledge that their machine was finally worthy of their courage. As the war drew toward its bitter end, German officers began ordering retreats rather than duels. They called in airstrikes or artillery instead of risking their tanks against the new Shermans. The myth of the invincible Panther had shattered. By April 1945, the Easy Eight was more than a tank, it was a statement. It proved that war favored not the strongest, but the most adaptable. From Detroit's assembly lines to Europe's frozen roads, 1,000,000 small hands and quick minds had turned ridicule into respect. The Easy Eight didn't just match German armor, it ended the conversation entirely. But its true power wasn't in its gun or its armor. It was in what it represented, the moment when industry, ingenuity, and courage merged into a single unstoppable force. And as the Reich began to crumble, one final confrontation would show just how far that force could go and what it would cost to bring the war to an end. By the spring of 1945, the sound of the Easy Eight's engine had become the rhythm of Allied advance. From the frozen forests of Belgium to the shattered bridges of the Rhine, its rumbling presence signaled not just power, but inevitability. German soldiers who once smirked at the sight of Shermans now whispered warnings into their radios. Acht! The new ones, long barrel! That simple phrase carried a new kind of fear. The tide of war had turned, not through mythic superweapons, but through relentless adaptation. The Easy Eight represented the full maturity of America's wartime machine, an alliance of engineers, laborers and soldiers unified by necessity. In a matter of months, entire factories had been retooled, production doubled and supply lines stretched across oceans. Replacement parts moved from Detroit to the Ardennes faster than German fuel could reach the front. The United States had mastered a form of warfare the Reich could never equal: logistics. The Easy Eight was the armored face of that invisible empire of motion. Every detail of the tank reflected lessons learned in fire. Its suspension meant crews could move through ruined towns without breaking tracks. Its improved gun meant confidence in duels that once seemed suicidal. But beyond its mechanics, the Easy Eight's real power was psychological. When soldiers trust their machines, they fight differently. They take ground faster. They recover quicker. They believe. And belief, multiplied across divisions, becomes unstoppable momentum. By late March, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine. Columns of Easy Eights rumbled into the German heartland, their hulls streaked with mud and snowmelt, names painted in white across the armor: Thunderbolt, Hotfoot, Rebel. They were no longer cautious. They moved with purpose. German defenses crumbled before them, not because of weakness in steel, but exhaustion of spirit. The myth of German invincibility had been undone by American persistence, one improved bolt at a time. Prisoner interrogations revealed the psychological toll. Many German tank crews admitted they no longer sought battle unless forced. Some sabotaged their own machines to avoid hopeless fights. The Reich's engineers had built masterpieces, Tigers and Panthers that were feats of craftsmanship, but they could not be built fast enough, repaired fast enough, or fueled long enough to stop what was coming. In contrast, the Easy Eight was built to last, to move, to adapt. It was not a single tank's triumph, but the triumph of a system that refused to break. In towns like Kassel and Fulda, civilians peered from cellars as American columns passed, dozens of Easy Eights leading convoys of infantry and trucks. Their arrival brought a strange silence. The same engines that had roared in combat now idled in peace, men climbing out with dazed relief. For the first time in years, the German people saw an army not of destruction but of order. The war machine that had been mocked as weak had become the instrument of liberation. Inside each tank, crews carried memories they would never escape. The smell of burned oil, the static hiss of radio chatter before contact, the faces of men who didn't make it home. They had seen how quickly victory could turn to loss, how thin the armor truly was between courage and death. Yet for all its destruction, the Easy Eight had given them something fragile but vital: hope. Hope that human hands given purpose could build something that changed fate. Historians would later debate whether the Easy Eight was truly superior to the Panther or Tiger in raw numbers. On paper it wasn't. Its armor was still thinner. Its gun smaller. But war isn't decided on paper. It's decided in moments. In who fires first, who moves faster, who adapts when everything falls apart. The Easy Eight's advantage wasn't invincibility. It was rhythm. Its crews learned to keep moving when others stopped. Its factories kept producing when others burned. Its nation kept learning while others clung to pride. As the Allies pressed deeper into Germany, they found towns littered with abandoned tanks, engines stripped for parts, guns jammed with mud. The Easy Eights rolled past them, unrelenting. They were not symbols of perfection. They were symbols of endurance. That difference defined the closing months of the war. When victory finally came in May 1945, crews who had fought from Normandy to the Elbe parked their tanks one last time. Some touched the armor as they climbed down, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. They had cursed it, repaired it, and trusted it with their lives. It had carried them through hell. The Easy Eight was more than metal now, it was memory. Its legacy would outlast the war. The design became the foundation for post-war armored doctrine. Korea 1950. The Easy Eight rolled again, this time against Soviet-made T-34s. Once more, its agility and reliability proved decisive. Engineers continued refining the concept, eventually leading to the M26 Pershing, the Patton series, and decades later, the M1 Abrams. The DNA of the Easy Eight, mobility, adaptability, and crew trust, ran through them all, but its influence reached even further. Military strategists began to realize that warfare was no longer about who built the biggest gun, but who could learn the fastest. The Easy Eight embodied that principle. It wasn't born from genius alone, it was born from listening. To the mechanics, to the soldiers, to the field reports scribbled in cold trenches. It was a machine made by collective intelligence, not arrogance. That philosophy would define Western warfare for generations. Across the ocean, in peacetime America, the same factories that built the Easy Eight switched back to cars, farm equipment, and peacetime tools. Yet for the workers who had labored under its assembly lines, the echo of the war lingered. They knew they had built something that changed history. Some kept pieces of the tank, spent shell casings, nameplates, photographs, as proof that even ordinary hands could help end tyranny. For the Germans who once mocked the Sherman, the memory was more complicated. Post-war interviews with former Panzer commanders revealed a grudging respect. They admitted the Americans had done what the Reich could not, turn mistakes into mastery. The Easy Eight, they said, was not feared because it was perfect, but because it never stopped improving. In the decades that followed, surviving tanks became museum pieces. Visitors ran their hands across the cool, scarred armor, reading the names of battles carved into their sides. Some wondered how such a modest-looking machine could help win a world war. But those who knew its story understood. It wasn't the machine alone. It was the spirit behind it. The Easy Eight stands today as a reminder that evolution, not arrogance, wins wars. It proved that strength without flexibility crumbles, but adaptation endures. On the fields of Europe, where steel once clashed and the air reeked of cordite and fear, its tracks are long gone. Yet in every modern tank, in every doctrine of speed and precision, the ghost of the Easy Eight still rumbles forward. As the final engines fell silent and peace returned, one veteran summed it up simply: "We started the war running from their tanks. We ended it chasing them." The world had learned a lesson written in smoke and steel. Victory doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who learn fastest. Fight smartest and never stop moving forward.